On to our next story. The UN envoy to Syria says that he has received indications from the Syrian government that they are willing to halt all types of aerial bombing and artillery shelling on the city of Aleppo for a period of 6 weeks.
In this connection, especially in light of the latest worrisome news of heavy fighting near Aleppo, I have requested the government of Syria to facilitate a UN mission to identify one district inside Aleppo in order to use it as an example of what could be the benefit for the population if there is a freeze. The government of Syria
Staffan de Mistura did not indicate any dates as when the suspension of airstrikes would begin. He also called the new development a glimmer of hope and continued to emphasize on a political solution to the nearly 4-year conflict. Political commentator and journalist Mr. Gearóid joins us now from the French capital, Paris. Sir, welcome to the program. Talk to us more about the willingness expressed by the Syrian government to implement this ceasefire on the city of Aleppo, and how effective can these localized ceasefires be, which effectively lead to the free flow of humanitarian aid as well?
First of all, the Syrian government have expressed openly the wish from the very start of this conflict to negotiate. They have always expressed the desire to have dialogue. That has been very, very clear from the start. The big problem with dealing with the United Nations is that the United Nations is effectively an extension of U.S. power, of the U.S. government, and of U.S. policy. And so any attempts to negotiate with the UN are really attempts to negotiate with the United States. The United States has not relinquished their desires for regime change. In fact, they have continued to arm and train the so-called moderate rebels, who are referred to as the Free Syrian Army in Turkey. This Free Syrian Army does not really exist. It's mostly made up of Al-Qaeda jihadist terrorists. I think this attempt to have negotiations with the Syrian government is a sign that the Syrian Arab Army is effectively liberating the country. In other words, they are about to take Aleppo, and NATO is in crisis. It's in deep crisis also, of course, in Ukraine, where they have failed to put down the rebellion there. So I think that at the moment this is a sign that NATO is looking for a way out. Of course, there is another clause here, and this is that they are using ISIS to put pressure on the Syrian government. In other words, they are probably using the threat of an escalation if the Syrian government doesn't call a ceasefire. So the Syrian government will certainly listen to the proposals, but whether or not they would be advised to follow them is another question, because they have the upper hand in Aleppo, and it would, of course, give the Syrian Arab Army and the Syrian people enormous courage if they were to finally liberate Aleppo from the terrorists. So it's very difficult to say what the Syrian government will do. I'm sure they will try to enter into some sort of negotiation with the UN on this.
Thank you very much,
But whether or not they will act in that matter is another question.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gearóid joining us from the French capital, Paris.